Welcome back, everyone, to take up the topic for today. Week 29, self-effort too is needed. Swamiji writes, truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhans Yogananda. These past weeks we discussed the need for balancing self-effort with receptivity to divine grace. Both are important in the spiritual life. Passive dependence on grace hasn't the magnetism to attract grace. Boastful self-confidence, however, which closes itself off from the higher divine power, is shallow, brittle, and given life's many uncertainties, susceptible to ultimate failure. There is a story in the Bible that illustrates the need to put forth personal effort so as to draw magnetically on the divine power. The story occurs in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 8. And the story goes thus. But as he went, and he refers to Christ, the crowds nearly suffocated him. Among them was a woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and who had derived no benefit from anybody's treatment. She came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak. As a result, her hemorrhage stopped immediately. "Who was it who touched me?" Jesus asked. When everybody denied it, Peter remonstrated, "Master, the crowds are all around, pressing you on every side." But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me. I felt power going out from me." When the woman realized that she had not escaped notice, she came forward trembling and fell at his feet and admitted before everyone why she had touched him, adding that she had been instantaneously cured. "Daughter," Jesus said, "it is by your faith that you have been healed. Go in peace." Now Swamiji goes on to write, self-confidence and self-effort are necessary as the ignition of a car is necessary to the motor. Of what use the ignition, however, if the motor itself will not work? Wise is he who recognizes the real power in the universe and guides his life by that supreme power. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 9th chapter, "To those who meditate on me as their very own, ever united to me by incessant worship, I make good their deficiencies and render permanent their gains." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So let's take up this beautiful story where this woman, now Christ, wherever he would go during the last 3 years of his ministry, wherever he would go, he would have crowds following him. And that would, of course, alarm the Romans who were trying to keep the crowds in check, who was trying to keep law and order between the Jews and the Romans. So any gathering they would see was potential trouble and social turmoil for them. But wherever Christ would go, he would have people following him. And in one such visit to a place, there was this lady who has been suffering for 12 years. And it is not easy for her to have come into this gathering where Jesus is with his disciples and the other crowds, because at that time it was considered unclean for women to even be around in social settings. And for her to have taken the courage, the confidence, to overcome all that opposition, that obstacle, and tell herself, I know Christ can heal me if I can simply touch the hem of his garment. It's enough. Because it was hard for her to get Christ's attention, mobbed as he was wherever he would go. So even in this situation, he was mobbed, and she somehow pushed her way through the crowd and held on to the hem of his garment. And immediately Christ knew that someone has touched me. And he looks around because he felt that power going out from him. He looks around. And like Peter says, "Oh Lord, everybody is pressing around you. How do we know who is it?" And Christ said, no, I know someone has touched me and someone has been healed. And sometimes people wonder, but why did Christ have to call the woman out? Because she realized that she cannot escape notice. She was a little worried about being noticed because of the social, prejudices against it. But Christ calls her out for a reason. It was also to challenge the established traditions and practices that were not compassionate, that were not human in those times. And so he calls her out and tells her very clearly, it is your faith that has healed you. Christ could do wonders, he could heal, but he would also say, there has to be receptivity. When he would go to his certain places where there was no soul receptivity, where people didn't believe in him, he could do no miracles. And that is no indication of Christ's power, because God does not have anything to prove to anybody. He does not need to prove anything to anybody. He could perform miracles when people were receptive, because he was respectful, like God is respective of everyone's free will. If you choose to close your heart, he is not going to force that door open. He will respect it and walk away. And that is why he tells this woman, it is your faith that has healed you. I can do miracles. But even God's hands are tied when we can't open our doors, the doors of our consciousness to his love. It's a very potent statement that he makes. And then again, Swamiji goes on to say, well, there were many people pressing around Christ, touching him. I'm sure everybody could have had some healing. Why is it that everybody didn't have any healing? Why is it that this woman drew that grace? Her faith. And it was not a faith which just took from Jesus. And that is an important point we want to understand about grace. Self-effort, that is a subject of discussion. When it is selfish, it cuts off the flow of grace. But when it is self-giving, it draws grace. What is self-giving in this case? And in another story I want to share, in the autobiography of a yogi, Yogananda ji talks about as a young child of 8, when he was afflicted by Asiatic cholera. And his health was despaired of. He was on deathbed. There was no cure at that time. And his mother frantically tells him, their guru was Lahiri Mahashaya. And his mother tells him, because he was completely weak, he didn't have any strength, his mother tells him, look at the picture of Lahiri Mahashaya and bow to him mentally, because she knew that the child didn't have the energy to bow physically. She said, bow to him mentally. And Yogananda ji does that, and instantly there was a blazing light and he is healed and he is well. And what is the first thing he does? He gets up, bows to his mother, appreciating the deep love and faith she had in her guru's power to heal. And what does the mother do? The mother in turn bows her head to Lahiri Mahashaya and thanks the guru for his healing, for healing her child. And Yogananda ji writes in that story, he said this experience brought an intensification of love. Now this is very important. We talk about devotion. How do I develop devotion? How do I offer myself more to God? It is through self-effort. And that self-effort is an inner work. There is the outward aspect of self-effort, but more importantly, faith. The faith that his mother showed, the faith that Yogananda ji showed as an example of his mother, it's an inner work. What is that inner work? The knowing, the inner knowing that if I look at this picture, it can heal me. The knowing by this woman that if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. Now we may ask ourselves, what is faith? At one point, Christ rebukes a disciple. He says, is it because you see that you believe? Well, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. That's a higher faith. Now, what does that mean? Faith can be born from experience. Faith can be born from inner communion. Faith that is born from experience is still cast in that crucible of duality. But faith that is born of inner communion with God assumes an imperishable knowing. You just know. There is no need for doubt, and there is no room for doubt. And that is why Christ says, if your faith is even as tiny as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, get up from here and move there, and it will be moved. Now, what does he mean, faith as tiny as a mustard seed? It is not to say even if you have a little faith, it will do. The mustard seed is small, but it has the complete clarity of its purpose and its destiny. It knows the tree that it will become. It knows the fruit that will be produced. It is small, it is tiny, it is a seed. But it has the intelligence and the clarity of life that God has bestowed on it. Likewise, faith, when it is an inner work, draws that clarity, draws that inner knowing, because in inner communion with the Spirit, you draw on the intelligence of Spirit itself. Faith that is based on outer experience will go through time and space and challenges repeatedly until again it has to be taken inward and it has to be validated on the foundation of inner experience, of realization in the divine. Until it is born and based on intuition, that is what Christ means when he says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. How are they not seeing and yet believing it? Because through inner communion they know it. And that is what, as devotees, we are too called on in our self-effort. That self-effort we have to realize, friends, yes, it is our 25%, as Yogananda ji said. But remember, everything is borrowed. Every power is borrowed from the divine. Our breath, our body, mind and spirit, the prana, it's all borrowed from the divine. And therefore, the wise in everything they do must do it with the knowing, Lord, thou art the doer, for everything flows from thee. And there is a beautiful line that Christ tells Saint Catherine in her dialogues with Christ. Everything that is born of God has the power to overcome the world. Everything that is born of God, of Spirit, has the power to overcome suffering. This woman's faith in this story was born of God. It was not born out of her past experience. She had no past experience of healing with Christ. It was born of her inner knowing that he can heal. And that is why Christ took the time and the trouble amidst all those pressing crowds to find out who it is who touched me, who had this kind of faith. It was not common in those times to see that faith. People rejected his teachings. People persecuted him. To find someone among those crowds that showed that faith, he wanted to make it an example for everybody. When you have faith, the impossible can become possible. And as St. Paul would say, without faith, all works are dead. All self-effort, that is a restless egoic manifestation, are dead works, because it draws very little grace, because it is not rooted in God. It is not rooted in that inner knowing of what is God trying to do through this form. You are trying to do what you want to fulfill your selfish desires. Such self-effort draws little grace, very little. But self-effort that flows from an inner knowing that I don't exist. This is God in creation through each one of us. And it is God alone that has the power to do anything. That has the power to make the perishable imperishable. And that is why it is said that when the consciousness of spirit comes into man, the mortal becomes immortal, the perishable becomes imperishable. Where there is darkness, light shines. And we all are that light. But we have to draw that light into ourselves, into our thoughts, into our action, one step at a time. We are trying to overcome a journey of millions of incarnations where we have played with darkness and we have played with light. But now the magnetism of this journey begins to build up when we begin to consciously choose to play with the light. When we begin to consciously choose again and again, God, you alone. That's when our magnetism begins to grow. That's when our faith also begins to grow, because in constant communion with God, even through your outer actions, you're growing closer and closer until you become one with Him. As Krishna says, to those who meditate on me as their very own. Why? Because we think we are separate from God. Krishna is saying God is your very own because He is you. You are in Him, provided you draw that grace and that light by our thoughts and that action. And He says, when you are united to me in incessant worship. What is incessant worship? Worship that does not cease. Every breath. How shall I love thee, Lord my God? Through every breath I breathe. How shall I seek thee, Lord my God? Through every breath I breathe. How shall I serve thee? How shall I worship thee? Through every breath I breathe. Through every breath, if we can remember, if we can affirm, it begins with affirmation, and constant affirmation makes it a realization. And when you realize, it slowly begins to become a truth inside you. Then it does not take laborious effort to remember. But remember, forgetfulness right now is a disease we are trying to overcome. So be kind to yourself, but we want to practice the teachings, affirm to yourself. As Krishna says, that is where the teachings help. Take the aid, the help of these teachings to remind yourself. Where Krishna says, by incessant worship, I make good their deficiencies and render permanent their gains. And in other ways, St. Paul would say that when I am weak, then I am strong. Why? Because when God is in me, even my weaknesses does not matter. Because God can make good my deficiencies and render permanent the gains. What is that permanent gain? The presence of the Spirit in your consciousness that has driven away the darkness of weakness. Until then, our faith is like a house that is built on sand. If I see, I will believe. If I experience it, I will believe. If not, I don't know. But faith that is built on intuition, inner communion, is a house built on stone. Even when the storms of trials shriek, as Master would say, the house on the stone will stand firm, but the house on the sand will crumble. And so here the Masters are telling us, how should our self-effort be? Which is why inner communion, meditation, friends, is not an option. Without daily inner communion, our weakness will continue to be tested. And if we want to convert it into our strength, we must commune daily with the true essence of who we are in spirit. Go within, experience that inner silence, that inner stillness, which is of spirit, which is God's presence within you. And every time you are in that inner silence, every time you are in that inner stillness, the light of God is working in your spine and in your brain. It is changing the patterns of energy in your brain. It is changing the memory in your cells. The light is intelligent and it has power. And it is instantaneous healing, just touching the hem of a garment. 12 years, she struggled with it. But when the light came, as Master said, darkness will vanish as though it never was. And so that is all it takes, friends. So sometimes years of labor, her 12 years of struggling was not in vain. It drew her to the point where she drew that grace. If she would have given up, would she have experienced healing? Another point to consider in the story. 12 years, somebody could have given up and stayed like an outcast in society. I'm tired of this struggle. Everybody is against me. No treatment is helping me. You can give up. Perseverance is important in faith. That no matter how much you are set back by duality, by unfulfilling experiences, the teachings tell us, keep pushing forward. Keep putting that one step in front of the other. Keep calling on to God's name. And then when she met Christ with great compassion, he looked at her and called her daughter. When everyone was ostracizing her, he called her daughter. You know, that means a lot. It's your faith that has healed you. And that faith has come from giving. Her love, her gratitude, her faith was giving. It was not just taking from Jesus. And Jesus felt that. And so, the masters tell us, to receive grace, predispose yourself to it. By your works, by 12 years of effort, struggling, looking for healing, continuing to hope for healing. And then, when the time comes to give yourself it all, I will push through the crowds and somehow get to the hem of his garment, and I will be healed. That is faith, to overcome obstacles. Knowing that God's name is not taken in vain. That is the power of these stories that come to us, that have stayed with us for millions of years. Even today, these stories have great life. They are living, they are not dead, because they are stories with principles that you and me can continue to emulate. And that gives us clear lessons in faith. How can I develop faith? As Master said, this experience intensified my love. You struggle, you persevere, you endure, you overcome, devotion blossoms. And that is why when somebody asked Yogananda ji, please give me devotion, I've been trying very hard, and Master said, no. It's like you're telling me, give me devotion. No, you got to earn it. You got to earn through your works. You have to endure and overcome. And devotion naturally flowers like the fruit, like the mustard on the tree. So faith as small as a mustard seed must have conviction, clarity, sincerity. And this is why Yogananda ji says, in repeating the affirmations, bring conviction, bring sincerity, intelligently. The mustard seed knows what it has to produce. It will not produce apples. It will produce mustard. Be willing. The mustard seed is offering no resistance in becoming a mustard tree. It is not saying, I want to be an orange. It will become the mustard seed that it is destined to be. And where does our resistance come from? God likewise, for just as he has even for the tiny mustard seed, has a purpose for each one of us. But we have been resisting because we have a purpose of our own. Because he has given us free will. So here is another point about faith. The gifts that God has given us, our body, our mind, our spirit, our breath, our free will. We must remember it is all borrowed. And if it is borrowed, we must refer it back to the source. And joyfully borrow from the source. Don't take possession of it and run with it. That's stealing. We steal from God. We steal the breath, we steal the prana, we steal energy, we steal everything from God and tell God, this is not yours. Everything is from him. When we go back to the source, it's the right thing to do. Power flows naturally. You don't have to work at developing power. No. All these aspects of God, joy, power, wisdom, sound, light, they already exist. The veil that covers them is our independent expression of free will, divorced from the divine will. And that is our journey, united with the divine will. Faith flowers. When you unite it with the divine will, it becomes an imperishable knowing. And as I was reading renunciation, as Swamiji very beautifully says, renunciation means nothing less than the gift to God of oneself. Not holding a single thought, a single ounce of energy for yourself with the fear, if I give God everything, will he really take care of me? Will he really take care of this little detail that I know of? He knows all our details more than we know our very own thoughts. We don't know our past, like Krishna tells Arjuna, I know all your past, but you do not know me. So God knows us even more than we know ourselves, but we like to think that I know myself better than what God may know of me. And so we have that arrogance. No. And the fear that we can't get up in the morning and say, Thy will be done. That was Swamiji's simple prayer every morning. Lord, not my will, but Thy will be done today. And that's a very simple prayer. We don't need, too much complex words in prayer. Simple. Let your will flow through me today and help me know. Swamiji writes here, renunciation is of the heart. So in our self-effort, renounce the self. Renounce the self and open the heart. The more you find yourself in a desire, you close the door. In meditation, through active practices of the paths of yoga and yamas and niyamas, uproot that desire. Clean out that desire. And the more we do that, the heart opens. And God is able to come in and take charge. And Swamiji says, the least gift that we give to God will return to us in divine blessings 1,000-fold. Somebody once asked Swamiji as he was traveling, a man, he realized he had no money, so he asked Swamiji, will you give me can I borrow some money from you? And I will give it back to you. And Swamiji readily took out whatever, 500 or whatever money he needed and gave it to him. And the man was surprised that Swamiji so readily gave it because they were total strangers. And he asked Swamiji, are you sure that I will give this money back to you? You gave it to me with so much confidence. Do you trust me to give this money back to you? And Swamiji said, no, I do not trust you, but I trust life. And this is the difference between faith born of experience. Your faith born of experience will tell you, I have no faith in a stranger bringing this money back. But a faith born of intuition or of the natural laws of life will tell you, like Swamiji writes here, that even the least gift you give to God will come back to you 1,000-fold. If not through that stranger who has taken your money, through somebody else. God does not steal. He will not take your money and not give it back to you. And anyway, the money too, who is it? It is God. As Master said, somebody put $100 in the collection plate, and then he was upset against God for not fulfilling the wish that came with the $100 bill. And Master was like, but he forgot that God himself is that $100 bill. This is the complicated territory of the intelligence. So faith surpasses it. And I want to close with this 2 lines. One is which says, yogis must walk by faith, not by sight. And what does this mean? When you walk by sight, you walk through your senses. When you walk by faith, you walk through your inner knowing. And so, as St. Paul says, as Krishna says, let's fight the good fight of faith in all our self-effort. Om.